What's up everyone, I'm Vivi and welcome back to some more Sly Cooper. Now many of you have been asking me, when are you going to talk about Sly Cooper 5? Look, I was planning on talking about Sly Cooper 5, but with all of the news we've been having lately, I guess the video got left behind, but here it is finally. Now here's what I plan on doing. Instead of making one huge video talking about Sly Cooper 5, the story and gameplay, everything together basically, I decided to split everything into parts. Part 1 being the story. And no, this isn't going to be a fan fiction video where I focus on detail and where the characters go, who they talk to specifically. That's not the point of the video. What I want to do is simply discuss general ideas and scenarios I've had in mind for quite a while now. And if you disagree with some of the ideas mentioned in the video, say so in the comment section below and share your own thoughts. So with that being said, let's get started. Let's start by talking about the obvious. Sly being stuck in ancient Egypt. How is he going to return home? In Sly Cooper 4, the villains were from the future. We can say they knew the gang. What they could do in Sly Cooper 5 is time travel backwards, and what I mean by this, slowly move into the future instead of time traveling to the past. I mean, that was the whole point of Sly Cooper 4, go back in the past and fix the problems that were caused by the paradox. Perhaps in Sly 5, they might have no choice but to slowly move into the future. And think of this, in the next game, there will be no more villains from the future interfering with the timeline. We will have bad guys from the actual timelines. For example, the bad guys Sly's ancestors met throughout their lives. And why did I say no choice to travel into the future? Could Sly be on his own, or will the gang find him and move into the future together? The most obvious one is the gang finds him and they all work together like usual. Or, here's another scenario, Sly will be on his own, whereas the gang will remain in the future and have their own episodes. They'll have to go through missions until they try and figure out how to find Sly. But knowing Sly, there's one problem. If he is on his own, time traveling to the future, how will he figure out everything? He's not a technical genius. Sure, the blimp crashed in ancient Egypt, but how is he gonna assemble the parts? Let alone Slytunkhamen. He's the one who created the Thievius Raccoonus. I don't think he was a technical genius. Plus, we're talking about ancient Egypt, where technology didn't really exist. All we had back then was metal carving. Sure, maybe Sly could meet someone who's super smart, but how will that person understand the technology from the future? Unless, of course, we're talking about Sly 5 taking place in ancient Egypt throughout, which I doubt. I think the team would rather explore a bunch of different worlds. While more than one at least. I could imagine having a very lengthy episode in ancient Egypt. For example, combine the lengths of 2 episodes into one. It could be the length of episodes from Sly 2. During that lengthy episode, they should focus on good character development. It's Slytunkhamen we're talking about, the creator of the book, the one who started the legacy. Sly interacting with the ancestor who started it all. Well, apart from the Kane and Bob and all, I think a good part of the game should focus on that. Sure, Sinzara was originally planning on adding an extra episode in Sly 4, Sly meeting his ancestor in Egypt, but it is assumed that Sly will still meet his ancestor in Sly 5. If so, instead of making a small episode they had intended for Sly 4, they could make it longer. And while Sly is stuck in Egypt for a good part of the game, the gang could try and figure out how to go back in time. Now the question is, what kind of time machine are we talking about? One which will require an artifact, Bentley's time machine, or Penelope style, where you don't need an artifact to travel back. Now let's imagine the gang finds Sly. Let's imagine the machine breaking down. They get lucky enough and find Le Paradox's parts from his own time machine. Bentley assembles everything and the time machine is in working order again. Now here's the good part. Will the team decide to go with fan service, or will they really come up with a great plot? What kind of fan service am I talking about? Oh, they haven't seen this ancestor yet. Let's throw this character in and let's make it so they end up in a timeline where there's an ancestor they still haven't met. You understand what I'm trying to say? This isn't what I really want in Sly 5. I don't want anything predictable and too easy. Believe me, I would love to see the other ancestors, but how will they do so without making the game too predictable? You know, just for the sake of meeting ancestors we haven't seen yet. But let's imagine the team agreeing with the idea of presenting new ancestors. Let's imagine the time machine doesn't require any artifact. One realistic approach the team could use is Sly being the one who wants to visit these ancestors, simply to discover them, see what they're like. Then again, is Sly Cooper that kind of character, wanting to meet his own ancestors, risking the timeline? Would he do that? In Sly 4, the gang had no choice, they were trying to fix the timeline, so Sly had to meet his ancestors. Out of all his ancestors, I think the ones he'd like to see again are his parents. I'll talk more about this later on in the video. Talking about ancestors, what if the gang's accessories led them into those specific timelines, where ancestors exist, the ones we haven't seen yet? It'd be way too cliche. And plus, their accessories are pretty futuristic, okay? Those are gonna take them into the future. They're gonna skip a bunch of ancestors. That's what I'm trying to say. I just don't want Sly 5 to be like, oh, what a twist. Here's an ancestor that wasn't in Sly 4. Wow, would you look at that? Nah, I don't want that. I feel like they might do that just for the sake of introducing these ancestors we haven't seen, like I said before. Oh, but wait, what if Murray, Bentley, and Carmelita go back to the past slowly? They meet Sly's ancestors, but the thing is, how is it going to feel like not having Sly, interacting with those ancestors? And how are they gonna make it so Murray, Bentley, and Carmelita end up in those specific timelines? Don't tell me they're gonna decide to add the ancestors we haven't seen yet. I just don't want anything to be predictable. Am I the only one who thinks this way? I don't want the team to use that easy route. I want them to come up with a very good excuse as to why the team would visit the ancestors we haven't seen. I don't want players to start rolling their eyes. Oh, of course they would do that. Oh, of course, how convenient, we haven't seen this ancestor yet. I just want a very well written story with good reasons for the gang's actions. Okay, but if they're not gonna meet any other ancestor, then they're gonna go to the future immediately, and that's too easy. So again, if the team wants the gang to go through time slowly, what will they make them do so? Let me guess, Sly wants to find out more about Clockwork, but that is very risky. Interacting with Clockwork in the past can cause major paradoxes, and I will talk about Clockwork as well. And honestly guys, I do want to see Henriette One-Eyed Cooper. She's seen Clockwork according to the official guide of the collection. Well, they all met Clockwork, but I always wanted to see Henriette. Next, Sly Cooper 4 is understandable. The paradox had the canes stolen. The team had to go back in the past and fix that. But in Sly 5, no one from the future is interrupting the timeline. So, if we're not talking about villains from the future interrupting with the timeline, how will they visit those timelines? Like I said before, the only thing I can think of right now is the choice lies in Sly's hands. Unless, of course, the time machine only is programmed to time travel only decades. But how will that make them meet the ancestors we haven't seen yet? It just sounds weird to me. Next, now I keep talking about the gang finding Sly in Egypt. How will that be possible? A long time ago I made a theory video talking about Sly writing a message in a Thievius Raccoonus and that message appearing in the future. Bentley could discover that message and that's how they find Sly. Or maybe Carmelita could discover that message, who knows, maybe she was holding on to the Thievius Raccoonus because she misses Sly. Now there's a tiny problem. If Sly writes in that book, it's gonna cause some ripple effects. Why? Because some ancestors will see the message and it might affect the timeline a bit, and Bentley will notice that. But still, logically, one could say that the same ancestors from Sly 4 will also see that message. So if problems happen in that timeline, then they'll have no choice but to meet those same ancestors again. Now let's go back to what I said before. We could have a very lengthy episode in ancient Egypt, and in the present, we could have episodes with Carmelita, Murray, and Bentley, and these episodes can alternate. How about that? I could imagine an episode with Carmelita where she questions the paradox. Something like, where is Sly? It's your time machine, it's your fault. She's like about to beat him or something. That right there could be backstory. Paradox could say something like, my father knew your mother was something, and Carmelita doesn't let Paradox talk about her mother. And what happened to her parents? Was she abandoned? Maybe the Paradox can be like, Your mother abandoned you. My father told me a bunch of stories. Talking about backstories, what about Bentley? 2 scenarios happened actually. He was left at the orphanage. He was still inside an egg. Scenario number 2 was he wandered away from his family. If we go with the whole situation with the siblings, I could imagine a cutscene where his brother or sister randomly shows up. Are you Bentley? This sibling could perhaps be evil or a good person. Maybe someone who could join the team. I don't know. Around midway of the game, Sly returns home, and Penelope is the new bad guy, up to no good. And I know a lot of you will disagree with the idea of Penelope being the next villain. Again, if Sly comes back to the present midway in the game, that means they skipped the other ancestors. They pretty much ended time travel midway. And I've always said this, guys, let Sly 5 be the last game which focuses on time travel. Time travel isn't part of Sly Cooper, it's not the nature of the series, so get rid of it. With that being said, we could have a very lengthy episode in ancient Egypt and then we go back to the present and have episodes in the present. But really, if they do want to explore the other ancestors, they really need to come up with a good reason. I don't want them to write a story just for the sake of meeting ancestors we don't know much about. So if Sly does return home early on in the game, that would mean Sly doesn't really deal with the villain until the ending of the game. Sly 5 could simply focus on going through obstacles and backstories. The series really needs that. I understand, the Sly Cooper series is all about having episodes with a villain in each. Could Penelope hire a bunch of members? It's gonna sound too repetitive. We already had that in Sly 1, the Fiendish 5, in Sly 2, the Claw Gang. And Sly 3, we had villains in each episode. Same goes for Sly 4. I think they could change it up in Sly 5. Instead of having mini bosses in each episode, just put a bunch of missions which will add in a bunch of background information on characters. What I'm trying to say pretty much is have lengthy episodes. Episodes with huge open worlds. Have Sly explore ancient Egypt. It's a huge place. Side missions and all that. Why not add that, for example? Anyways, gameplays and mechanics, that will be left for part 2, most likely. So in short, Sly 5 could have very long episodes focusing on character development and exploring huge open worlds. As for the villain, we could encounter the person at the end of the game. So again, if Sly 5 does go with the whole episodes formula, they don't need villains for each episode. We've had that for quite a while now, and I think a change could do great for the series. Careful, I am not saying they should change up the gameplay, no. Just how the story unfolds. At a point, making a series too repetitive, it's just gonna get old. Anyways, let's get back to the point. If Sly 5 is not the end of the series, perhaps they could introduce a new villain in the ending. Pretty much a cliffhanger, but something far less worse than what we got in Sly 4. This villain could maybe be someone who escaped from the past, without of course causing any paradoxes. Or it could be a villain from the future. Penelope could be the villain in Sly 6 maybe. Well, not the main villain, but someone involved in someone's return. And who could that someone be? Clockwork himself. Talking about Penelope, is she going to redeem herself or become a bad guy in Sly 5? How could she redeem herself? The most obvious one could be saving Sly from the past, and that's saying if she had a change of heart throughout the game. If she is the one who's gonna save Sly from the past, that would mean we are going to get very lengthy episodes in ancient Egypt. But I don't see her as being the one who's gonna save Sly. That look on her face when she escaped jail, sending postcards. Why is she doing that? I feel like she's teasing Bentley. Haha, you thought you could stop me? I'm smarter than that. Clockwork, Clockwork, Clockwork. His brain, okay? I always thought of the idea of Penelope rebuilding Clockwork. Clockwork could be using her as a means to an end. And that could be one way of introducing backstory. Clockwork talking to Penelope, talking about what happened in the past. Of course, that is if Sly doesn't meet Clockwork in the past. He could meet him, but I'll talk about it in a couple of seconds, okay? In Sly 5, if Clockwork does return stronger, the team will face him most probably, but he will not be defeated. He will be stronger than ever. Boom, cue Sly Cooper 6. Now, Clockwork's immortality, like I just said, it could be explained by someone who found his brain. Or Sly could see Clockwork in the past. Here's one way of making the story less predictable. Clockwork could have been friends with Slytunkhamen. When Sly sees him, he's not a villain, and that's gonna confuse the life out of him. And I gotta say, that would be one excellent twist list. Want to make the story a bit deeper? Want to see a side of Sly we've never seen before? Sly unintentionally causes Clockwork to turn mad. And we can say this was destined to happen, Sly ending up in the past. Sly's gonna live with regret, he's gonna be angry, and the team's gonna calm him down and tell him it's not your fault, Clockwork is just insane. Or without thinking, Sly will try and stop Clockwork, but Bentley will warn him in time. Destroying Clockwork in the past will erase Sly's future, meeting Bentley, meeting Murray, the orphanage, his parents would have lived, or maybe not. Time travel has a very complex nature. I'ma leave it at that. Now, many of you have been talking about the idea of Clockwork using the parts of the blimp to turn himself into metal. Maybe. How smart was Clockwork? Maybe they could show this in the ending, how Clockwork became immortal. And remember, we can say this was destined to happen. We can say this is how it actually happened, like a time loop. Who knows, maybe a sorcerer could have been the one who turned Clockwork into metal, and this sorcerer could maybe be the future villain, someone who escapes the past. A different kind of villain, a villain with powers. I did talk about such villain in my Dark Sly Cooper Imagined video, maybe you'd like to check it out. Now let's move on to the introduction of Sly Cooper 5. How is the game going to begin? How's the introduction going to be like? One thing that really bothered me in Sly 4, the introduction lacked. All of the games we had before had the night of the attack and all that. Here's what I imagine happening in Sly 5. Sly walking in the desert, walking in the hot sand, and eventually passes out. Perhaps Slytunkhamen could be the one who finds him, instead of having Sly always finding his ancestor. That's one way of making something different in Sly 5. While passed out, we get a scene of the night of the attack, an actual scene. Not too intense. We could have Sly hiding in the closet and simply crying. They could also show the orphanage. He simply remembers his childhood. Could a tutorial level happen at the orphanage? Logically speaking, as a kid he's not skilled yet. Well, who cares, it's video game logic, but not too sure. I guess they could make some sort of little gameplay, the cookie heist, for example. As for the night of the attack, Sly could be hiding in the closet and simply crying. He could maybe say mom, dad when everything went quiet. And during the gameplay in the orphanage, have Sly talk. That could make it interesting. And the mission, like I said, would be to steal cookies. Add something we never had in the Sly Cooper series. There's one thing I want to add about Slytunkhamen. Make him the first ancestor who actually doesn't believe Sly. He's gonna see his cane. While some of the ancestors in Sly 4, it took him a short while to figure it all out, but for Slytunkhamen, since we're talking about lengthy episodes, have a lot of character interaction. His ancestor is going to notice the cane, and their canes do look alike. And Slytunkhamen is going to question him, who are you? Why do we look alike? Why do you have the cane? Add something deeper. With that being said, let's end off the video with the biggest question. Will Sly meet his parents? Matt Kramer had discussed about this on the Second Funniest podcast a long time ago. I think he compared the situation to Batman and Joker, if I remember correctly, time travel and all that. What's gonna make Sly go back and see his parents? Like I said before, Sly is hiding a lot of emotion. That's the type of guy he is. He doesn't show it. Eventually in Sly 5, something's gonna happen and he's just gonna break down and he's gonna be like Bentley. Before we go back home, I just want to make one stop. Not before the night of the attack, but imagine this, they do end up in that timeline, but before the Fiendish 5 attack. Now that's gonna be depressing, and Sly's gonna want to save his parents, and then Bentley's gonna be like, no, you can't do that, you're gonna interrupt the timeline. And that would be one heck of a deep story, and I'm not too sure if the team would go with that. And I think that's why Matt Kramer had scrapped the idea. He just didn't want to introduce the character to such intense situations. One thing they could do is Sly goes to that timeline and stares through the window and sees his parents. And he also sees his younger self all happy. Maybe that's all he wants to see. He just wants to see his parents' faces one more time. But we want to know more about Sly's father and mother. They should leave that for a prequel. Sly's father and mother and the whole Dr. M situation, they could explore those in a prequel, which I will talk about eventually. Anyways guys, this is it for the video. So what am I gonna say? Like usual, leave your thoughts in the comment section below, and yep, thank you for watching, and until next time.